newspaper. One was from a couple days ago, and one was from a couple weeks ago. And they suggest that the world is darkening, that the world is getting darker. One of them is a report from the Secretary General of the United Nations. And in his report of the state of the world, he said that there is a wind of madness sweeping the globe. And he cited conflicts and intensifying wars in Syria and Yemen, Libya, and many other places in the world. And he warned that the feeling of growing instability and what he called hair-trigger tension in many places in the world. Then, of course, there were so many of these clippings, I didn't bother to cut it out, is the virus, the coronavirus that we've all been worried about and reading about as it creeps like a dark cloud to different parts of the world. But that might seem far away. So in the Spokane paper, there was this article about a leader of a neo-Nazi terrorist group who purchased 30 acres north of Spokane, just north of Colville actually, in the wilderness. And this is a group that is plotting to start a race war. They consider only whites to be human. And that they use online classrooms and encrypted apps to spread propaganda, to promote hate crimes, and to plot acts of terror. Not terrorists coming from different parts of the world, but right here. And as we hear these kinds of news, and actually, by the way, you might have passed a sign on 10th that says liberty, which is a nice word, but what it really stands for is a group that wants to take different parts of various states in the West and create a new state of the Union for whites only. And so, you know, right in this neighborhood, there's this sense of tension and conflict and disrespect. And in the midst of this, Jesus says, "You are the light of the world." A city built on a hill cannot be hid. And he implies, you are that city. We are that city, full of light, not darkness. And that God is sending his light into the world in and through us to brighten and to expel the darkness. And it's a light that the dark cannot overcome. And it's summarized in the Lord's Prayer, that God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And that's the image of light spreading and going to various places and bringing love and respect and admiring the beauty in each person. It's like the light of Christ being refracted into a beautiful rainbow that surrounds and encircles us. And we are that rainbow of God's love on earth as it is in heaven. Earlier this week, I was working with the Spokane School District. The superintendent has some work groups, the standing groups, so they're always working. And this particular one is on racial equity. And I volunteered to bring some resources for the teachers on how to counter the very kind of white nationalism that appeared in the paper. because some groups of white nationalists are surreptitiously recruiting, even in schools, and teaching their dogma of hatred and violence and terror. And my volunteer led me to several phone calls, and it ended me up at Gonzaga University speaking to a professor who said, you know, for the last several years, some of the professors have gotten together to talk about countering hatred, and indeed they call it productive discomfort. And what they mean by that is that they don't like to talk about it. It makes them uncomfortable to think about this kind of hatred and this insidiousness and this counter the gospel of Jesus, even sometimes in the name of Jesus, a blasphemy. And yet they undertake that discomfort for the sake of productivity, for the sake of being positive and countering that negativity with, because Gonzaga's a Christian academy, right, a university, with the love of God and Jesus Christ. And the faith of people, not the despair and the hatred, the love of people. And so that sacred ground where we hear the hearts of people, we hear, like Isaiah said, people crying out, and we respond with the message of love that Jesus gives, the message of fairness and justice. And so we need to listen to each other as well, especially across languages and ethnicities and races, and what do other people experience? And how are they treated? And this discomfort actually is very timely for me because 4 o'clock this morning, I was awakened with a phone call of loved ones who were in the hospital and had experienced the stillbirth of a child. And they reached out to me to say prayers. And the prayers were on video messaging. So I got to see the adults, the mother, and the deceased baby in her arms. It's a place of discomfort. I almost didn't bring it up in the sermon. But in that place of discomfort, which was tragedy and sadness, heartbreaking sadness, the light of Christ came in. And they asked me to speak to them words of comfort and to say prayers. Now, I'd gotten up early and I was here waiting for a call back, and I went into the chapel here and I lit the candles on the altar, and I didn't know what to say. I just closed my mind and opened my heart and let God's prayer come through. And I can only trust that they felt comforted and that the light of God's love brought them peace. And one of them said, "Thank you, we'll call you in a couple days." And the last voice I heard was the mother tearfully saying, "Thank you, Rick." And so even in the darkest places of our lives, even when we're imprisoned by sin or by society, by our own desires, by mistakes we've made, by false accusations, in the darkest places of our lives, the light of Christ shines in. And even though academia calls of a Gonzaga, by the way, they invited the school district. This is the first year they had invited professors from Whitworth and professors from Eastern Washington University to join in this productive discomfort conversation, they turned around and invited up to 12 high school educators to join in this. They opened the circle to allow more people. And indeed, out of that conversation came this. Our professors at the School of Education who are training teachers to become, college students to become high school teachers, would like to hear from the high school where they experience the hatred. And together we can talk about how we can change the curriculum at the College of Education in our training, so when these college students graduate and they go into high schools, they have a background. And that conversation will then help the high school in the school district, the high schools in Spokane School District, already to respond, so that it'll be a fertile ground, a sacred ground of productivity. But I don't think we in the church, sacred ground's a good religious, powerful image, but I don't think productive discomfort quite captures where we are. Because where we are is redemptive discomfort. That's the heart of our faith. And where do we find the image of redemptive discomfort? On the cross. So, as Paul says, Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Now that's more than just discomfort. That was agonizing pain. But it was also discomfort. And we follow the crucified and risen one. We take on the darkness of the world, as I did by volunteering with the school district, to see how we can counter the hatred. And where a group, an international group of neo-Nazis won't find any followers, because the light of Christ is much more compelling and joyful and life-giving. And why would you dedicate your life to darkness and hatred and violence? And can you see the beauty in people who look different from you? Can you see the image of God even in a dead baby and crying mother and father? Can you see the beauty of the person who's behind bars or homeless and hungry? And this is the city that Jesus builds on a hill. It's called, among other names, St. Paul's. We are the city of light. We are the city. Now, we didn't generate this light. This light is God's love. This is the light of Christ. We receive it as a gift in order to let it shine. We forgive each other. We look for the best in each other. We take on redemptive suffering and discomfort for the sake of our society and our world. In the Bible, there are two images of the city of God that come to my mind. One is Ezekiel. The prophet Ezekiel ends, you've got the dry bones, you've got a number of prophecies, and way towards the end, as the culmination, is a message from God about the city, which is Jerusalem, and in the center of the city, the temple. And from the altar and the temple comes a river, and it comes out of from under the altar and goes out of the temple and goes out into the country. And where there was wilderness, there are trees, and there is food, and there are crops. It's the life-giving water. And the same image is repeated by God at the end of the Bible, the 21st chapter of Revelation. It's a city of God that comes down from heaven to the earth, so that God's will may be done on earth as it is in heaven. And behold, there are 12 gates of the city. And there's a river of life-giving water. And so, in our lives, St. Paul's has 12 majestic gates open to people to come and visit on Sunday, on Mondays for troop meetings, and gates that commerce goes both ways. And we will go out with the light of Christ that we receive and give it away, just as Jesus gave his life away, that God's everlasting life might fill us, and that his light will shine out and bring into the darkest corners of the world the living hope of Jesus Christ. The message that not only is it a dream, but it's a reality working through us, that God's will indeed is being done by us on earth as it is already being done in heaven. Let all the people say amen.
Amen.